interview questions. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Anna McDonald. I am from the Goodwill Workforce Connection Center in Lombard. We are a free service to the community. If you need help writing resumes, you're getting ready for an interview, or you are struggling with your job search, we are here to help you for free. We have computer banks, access to printers, a printer, fax, scanner, any support that you need in your job search, we can offer that. We are open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We are in the store. So when you come to the Lombard store, go through the main entrance of the store and head to the far right corner, and you will see the entrance into the Workforce Center. So let's get started with part 2 of behavioral interview questions. So last week we talked about dissecting interviews, how to answer it, the formula we use, and we're just gonna kind of build on top of that. So we're gonna go further into how to answer the questions, good interview endings, the employer's perspective, online interviews, and nobody sent me any questions, so I just kind of selected some of the questions that I hear from individuals that they kind of stumble over and don't know how to answer, which are really some of the basic questions. And they're so basic, I think we kind of wonder, well, why are they asking it? But it's really a good reason. So we're going to kind of dive into that in a moment. So again, the job interview, it's a part, it's crucial because it's an opportunity for the employer to figure out if you're right for the job, right? Are you a good fit for the organization? Are we going to be able to work with you 8 hours a day? Can we depend on you to show up and do your work? And then you need to figure out, is this company a good fit for you? Is this a company that I could believe in? I like their product. They're going to treat me well. So you need to figure out, is this a good fit for you? Can you work with that hiring manager 8 hours a day? And we shouldn't see this as an interrogation. It's really a conversation. You are having a conversation with another person, sharing your skills and what you could bring to the job and, be successful, how you could solve problems they have. And so I think that I recall interviews I've been in where I've been, really nervous. I was in probably, when I first started, working in the workforce, I remember I was applying for a position and I was so nervous in the interview. It was like maybe 21 or 20. And I did not realize the whole time during the interview, I was wringing my hands. It was like I was washing my hands and they were hand over hand. And I just, in the middle of the interview, I looked down and I'm like, what am I doing? I was so nervous. But really that comes with maybe a lack of self-confidence. And part of building your confidence is, I'm going to start here, is really reflecting on yourself, reflecting on your abilities, that you really have some great skills and successes in your position, or all of your positions. And that comes with really thinking about it, thinking about what I've done in the past that I could really be proud of and share, and goals I've met, relationships that I've built with my team members or my employer, or my hiring manager or your customer, and really thinking about it. You have to spend time, thinking about all of your behaviors, interactions you've had, problems you've solved, barriers that you overcome. And I think, in that reflective mode, writing it down, it builds your confidence. You've done more than you think you have. We get into the day-to-day of the job and we forget that we're really, we've had barriers that we didn't realize were barriers that we were able to overcome, more relationships that we were able to build upon and massage and if that's a greater relationship with your team members. I'm not talking about personal relationships outside of work, but trust. You've built trust, and what did you do to build that trust? So it really, this all comes with that reflection part. And so, in the interview, you could be self-confident and see that, I've got a lot to offer. So having said that, that's the job interview, right? It's this relationship that you are trying to, or a potential relationship that you're trying to figure out, is this going to work for both of us? Let's start though by talking about what's the employer's perspective? What are their turnoffs? What are we doing wrong in the interview that we don't realize we are doing wrong? So, this is some things that some employers or hiring managers have said. Candidates who arrive to an interview without showing any interest in the company or its mission, or expressing a desperate willingness to take a job. I remember talking with an employer once, a hiring manager, and she had noticed that, and granted, it was an entry-level job. It was working in a company that cleaned linens for hospitals. But they took pride in what they did, and they were actually a really good company. They treated their employees well. And so she noticed that when she was bringing in these candidates to interview, that they didn't know anything about the company. And so she thought, well, when I send them an email to invite them to the interview, I'm going to give them information about the company. I'm going to give them a link to the website so that they can have access, and hopefully they'll click on this link and see, more about the company and go to our website. Hey, Lenore, can you please turn your camera off? You're a little distracting. You keep moving around there. Thank you. And so she did that. And then in the interviews, she would ask, well, what do you know about our company? And still people were saying, I don't know anything about your company. And that was a real turnoff. And so she had a series of interviews one day. And when she asked that question, after giving them information in that email about the interview, none of them still took the time to learn anything about the company. And so it was a really bad interview day. And so she said, I had this gentleman walk in, and she goes, he was dressed really nice and he looked presentable. And, he had this aura about him that, he would have to say something really bad for me not to hire him. He's almost got the job. And so she brings him in, they sit down, and the first thing he talks about is how horrible his previous employer was, which, talking negative about a previous employer is really bad. So it's really important that you take time to learn about the company. What's their mission? What is their, what are their values? It's all really relative. It comes down to the question of, why do you want to work for us? Because it talks about motivation, which is the next one. Bring in enthusiasm to the interview. You are working for a company and you've got to believe in them. You've got to believe in their product. You've got to believe in their brand. This motivation is what gets you out of bed in the morning to go to work, to give 100%. So if you're taking a job only for the money, that is not enough motivation to keep going to the job, especially when there's problems, especially when there's, conflict, or, you're working on a project or there's an issue and we got to get over this barrier. You are not going to bring that enthusiasm to the job or want to solve this problem if you do not believe in what you are doing. So it's got to be more than the money. And I know we need jobs, we need to provide for ourselves and our family, but you've got to show enthusiasm. And I'm talking about being hokey or, that really stupid grin on your face and, over enthusiasm. It's just believing in the product and, having passion for the position that you're applying for. Another turnoff is a sloppy resume. Make sure, and at this point, I don't even understand why they were saying this, because they probably wouldn't interview you if you've been had a poor resume, but it really goes back to how important the resume really is. And it's the first impression that the employer has of you. So if you're in the interview, you may have a good impression already, or have left a good impression with the employer. And, it's yours really kind of for the asking. You could ace this if you could show, enthusiasm and everything else. But, a sloppy resume is always a turnoff. Tardiness. If you show up late to an interview in person or over the phone, the manager said, I'm very unlikely because I don't want to deal with attendance problems after you're hired. So that's why it's really important, if you're going to an interview, to make sure that you have directions on how to get there. If there's bad weather, that you give yourself enough time, because employers are worried about, are you going to show up to the job? Are you going to call in all the time? And that kind of goes back to your enthusiasm and your passion for the job. Complaining about past employers, they may be bad, but if you're complaining to me about any current or past employer, I get the impression you could quickly become unhappy in my department if it doesn't fit your ideals. So yes, social media is obviously, that's the talk of the town this week, especially with, everything going on with Facebook. It is a big issue right now in our modern time with, brands. Anybody can get onto social media, make a comment, it'll go viral, and that employer cannot, fix the damage already done to their brand in enough time. And they don't want employer or their employees going on there and making comments, even comments about a supervisor, that you didn't like. So, and beyond that, if you're just a Debbie Downer and you're negative all the time, who wants to work with somebody like that? It brings the team down. It keeps people off of the focus of doing their job. There's a lot of cleanup that HR has to do because you've got this person that pits people against each other or likes to gossip. It's just bad overall for the team. So, impressions are so important, and you always got to put your best foot forward in the interview and be careful of this. And we think that, it's unseen, but everything is being watched in the interview. Just like you need to watch everything that's happening in the interview. You need to if you're in an interview and there's multiple people, and it's kind of harder to do over in a virtual interview, which, I guess if somebody's interrupting another person all the time on camera, you could probably pick up on that. But body language is really important. You need to, how are people treating each other in the interview? What is the presentation of the company? How were you greeted by the receptionist? Are you offered water? This is all, reflects the values and who this person is that you're going to be working for. And you need to pay attention to that. Lack of motivation, it demonstrates, how you have contributed to the team and are self-motivated. It's really all interconnected. So these are some of the bigger turnouts, or turnoffs, I'm sorry, that employers are talking about that's happening in the interview. An Amazon recruiter said the single greatest thing a candidate can bring to a conversation is enthusiasm, and people with a chip on their shoulder, or people who feel they're entitled to the job, that does not come off well, and recruiters will pick up on that. I, have, in the position I'm in, we do have employers that come here to hire. So we have hiring events, and I can hear the conversations sometimes of, people being interviewed, and yeah, people come off, wanting first to know, what can you do for me as a potential employee? And that's not, yes, we need, like I said, it's a discussion, but you're really there to talk about the position and not what the employer could do for you at that moment. If you've had a bad experience with a previous employer, and you have a chip on your shoulder about how employers have treated you, yeah, there's some pretty crappy employers out there. We know that. But if you've had a bad experience, you need to leave that outside of the interview. Erin Stevens, she is a SHRM member, and she has certification, which is kind of a really great certification that HR people can have. She's a recruiter, and she says being too honest can also hurt a candidate's chances. Sometimes I have candidates who can be extremely honest to a fault, let me know they left a role because they couldn't, stand a former boss, or they were fired for attendance. She said, if you left because you can't get along with your supervisor, how are you going to handle your next boss, right? Sometimes we bring these bad behaviors with us. We're human, we have bad behaviors, we've had bad experiences, and sometimes we have to own it. We have to own our behaviors. So if we're not getting along with people, what is wrong with us? We need to go in and figure out what kind of issues are we having, and break this chain and this cycle of, bad jobs and bad relationships with our employers. Yes, there are bad employers out there, but you know what? There's bad employees too. So if you are a bad employee, then you need to own up to it and change your behavior. And here we go. We did talk about the self-reflection, research the company, and practice the interview question. And we talked about this last week, reflect on your behaviors, time you didn't get along or disagree with your supervisor. How do you solve problems, manage a difficult customer, the last time you called in sick? How do you manage stress? How do you determine priorities? What are your values? So when we're talking about, you have to pay attention to what is happening in the interview. You're paying attention to, the body language, you're paying attention to how people are treating each other. You need to figure out what skills are needed in this job to be successful. You could ask them this question, but they're giving you hints, and you have to pay attention. So if they're talking about, we have these problems that have to be solved, or how do you get over barriers? You show initiative, show good judgment, give examples of, take an initiative on a project, or times that you shown good judgment that had a good outcome. How did you handle stress? They might say that this is a fast-paced position. You're going to be interrupted a lot. It might, for some people, that's really stressful. Can you adapt? Are you resilient? How do you handle that stress? Analytical skills, that's being creative, that's communication, being persuasive. That's not only in, when we think of negotiation, we think of sales, but really we have to influence people sometimes to see things maybe our way. Maybe we're having a discussion about, a project, and, you want to state your opinion. You're basically influencing somebody to see something the way you see it. That's a negotiation. That's persuasiveness. That involves interpersonal skills and good communication skills, listening skills, attention to detail, planning and organizing, integrity. Are you reliable? Are you going to lie to our customer? Are you going to lie to us? Self-motivation. We talked about that earlier, right? You've got to be able to motivate yourself to do your job. The employer is not there to motivate you. You've got to motivate yourself. Team building, leadership, and management. So reread the job description. Now, we talked about this last week, but we really need to address it again. When you are getting ready for the interview, you need to go back and look at the job description. And again, figure out what are the skills that they are needing this candidates to have to be successful in the job. And then again, come up with a story to share, to demonstrate that I have been successful in this situation before. Let me give you an example. So, if they're talking about communication skills, that might mean interpersonal skills or writing skills. So you need to go back to that reflection and think about times that you were advising or explaining, articulating, instructing, writing, editing, translating, persuading, selling. This is all communication, and come up with an example. Again, being flexible, being able to stop something, start another project or go back or be interrupted. So can you work well under pressure, right? There's a lot going on. Can you multitask, think outside the box? And this is organizational skills. So it's time management, meeting deadlines, attaining and setting goals. Results driven. Did you save your company money? Did you eliminate inefficiency? This is the accomplishments that you're going to talk about, that you had an accomplishment and there were barriers to it, but we overcame. We were always worried about the results. And this is also about being the storyteller, right? That's the results side of it. So again, to refresh your memory, we talk about the STAR approach. You're in the interview, they're asking you a question. You got to give some background so they understand the content. So you're setting up the story. It could be a situation or a task that you're sharing. And then you go into your actions. That's the behavior. This is what you did. If it was, resolving a conflict with a customer, this is how I de-escalated it. And then, kind of going through those motions. And then what did we learn? Was there an error? Did we do something wrong? And that meant that now we had to retrain people or, whatever the result is. And then you're preparing and you start getting ready. In that preparation phase is where you're kind of recalling that list that you had made and that reflection, preparing for the interview. If you look at the values of a company, a lot of the behavior interview questions are going to be about those values. If it's confidentiality or honesty, integrity, working with a team, there's all kinds of, behaviors that, companies rely on to kind of, keep the customer coming back. It really comes down to this. We're here to make money. We need a customer and we want them to come back. And can we trust you to be good to the customer so they don't go to the competitor? Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water here. This might be a good time to kind of stop. And does anybody have any questions? Does something not make sense? Do you want me to elaborate?
I've got one I'm going to read for you, Anna.
Sure.
It says, I struggle with what is your weakness question. I know what my weaknesses are, but I'm afraid to be too honest. I know that technology is my weakness. I know you can't get a job in the modern day without great computer skills.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about actually that question in a minute, and I have a video about it that I want to share with you. But if technology is your weakness, when you're looking at the job description, there's usually something that says preferred or required skills. So if it's a required skill, they're going to ask you about whatever that technology is, and maybe it just might be Microsoft. There are so many great tutorials that you could, do on your own. People's Resource Center that partners with Addison has they just are actually starting their fall series on workshops that are free. So what you could say is, I was reading your job description and I noticed that you have, this is preferred skill. I haven't worked on it much, but I am taking classes and, working on learning more about it. So the fact that you realize that this is something, that might be a weakness, but you've already taken the initiative and you're working on it and you're self-aware that this is, a weakness. That's what they want to hear. Okay, everybody has a weakness. What is it? What are you doing about it? So in a nutshell, that's how you would answer that question and share with them that you're, taking tutorials or a class. But we're going to dive deeper into that question in a moment. Anybody have any other questions? I have 4 top interview questions that we're going to dissect in a moment. And here we go. So one of the questions, tell me about yourself. So this is an interview question that people, it's such an easy question, but it's revealing for the employer, right? So to answer the question, you should provide a quick synopsis of your professional experience relevant to the job description. So it's not about your life story. It's not where you were born or raised. It's not about your hobbies. It really is an opportunity for you to automatically share with the employer that I know, I think this is what you're looking for without actually saying that, but you need to ask them, what skills are needed. But if you've done your research, like we talked before, dissecting that job description, you're going to kind of know what they need. And so you want to go, through your resume briefly and point out the skills that you have that they're looking for. I worked here and I did this, whatever that is. So you start by discussing your current situation, explain your current role, highlight major relevant achievements and responsibilities, and then you work backwards by hitting the key points along with your professional journey. And then you connect the background, interest, and qualifications back to the job. So this is why it's so important to dissect what we talked about before, the job. When they're talking about communication or whatever it is that they're talking more about in the job description, that's what you're going to highlight from each of your jobs. So the tell me about yourself is tell me about your resume and what you've done that's relevant to this position. Anybody have any questions about the tell me about yourself interview question? Okay, we'll move on to the, yes.
Okay, when in this process of summarizing your experience in this reverse chronological order, when they ask you about this, how many sentences or how many minutes or what do they really expect you? Do they expect this to be 2 or 3 minutes? Do they expect it to be longer? How long is this summarization supposed to take?
Good question. And, as I was talking about this, I was thinking, talk about the 2-minute mark. So you only want to take 2 minutes. And that's when you need to practice how you're going to answer it. So that you don't, I mean, you could go over it a couple of seconds, but you don't want to babble on and on. You want to hit just a couple of highlights from each of the jobs that are relevant to the position that you're applying for. So that's a good question, around 2 minutes. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. So the next one is, why are you leaving your current position? So it's valuable information for employers to understand. It helps them ensure the opening will be a better fit. Make sure they can provide for what your previous employer did or didn't do, or if you might have contributed to a negative experience for both you and the employer. So, I want to give an example, but it's really kind of hard to give an example of, how you should say it, because every situation is different. But the point is, don't be negative, be confident. So if you're leaving because your employer is a jerk or your manager's a jerk, you have to be sure not to state that I'm not getting along with this person. You can share something good about the position, but you want to be honest. So you could, if it is a relationship issue, you could talk about, and again, you've got to be really careful, because you don't want to make it look like you're the problem, because maybe you are the problem. But that, you have worked on the relationship. So, this is something we could talk about one-on-one. But the point really, again, is to be positive about it. What did you learn from it? And confident in yourself. So that's all I'm going to say about that. It probably requires being a conversation to have one-on-one with me if you feel like you're leaving because of a bad situation. But in this day and age, that's the big deal right now, is that a lot of people that have been in positions for a while are taking the opportunity with this wage war going on, and looking for other jobs. So I'm not exactly sure a lot of employers are going to dig deep into that. It's just people are leaving because 2020 has changed so many people's lives. And it's been one of those, it was that kind of a year where we're deciding if we are, especially in employment, are you headed on the right track with your career? Sometimes you just kind of get into the day-to-day of our jobs and, we're off track. And it's really been a self-reflective year, couple of years actually. So I'm not sure the employer is really going to dig deep into this. They might just ask you, and you just, could say, I've been there a couple of years and I'm just want to know what else is out there. I had a lot of promotions. I've done well with this company, but I'm happy to explore if there's other opportunities where, that are along my career, or if you're making a career move, it's a different industry. You could talk about that. But, honestly, if somebody's leaving because of a bad experience with an employer, just be positive about it. But here, I guess, I did give a couple of examples. I'm just, unsure of these, but just maybe to give you some language to have is, while I highly valued my time in my previous company, there are no longer any opportunities for growth that align with my career goals. I enjoy working directly with customers, and this position aligns perfectly with my skill set and how I'm looking to advance my career. So end with an example of skills needed to be successful. Okay, you're talking about how this position, aligns with my skill set. Kind of talk about what is that skill, The other example is if you left because of bad managers. Mention briefly and neutrally that you two are on a separate track and move on. Wrap it up with something positive about the company. I realized the leadership of my team was going in a different direction, and I'm interested in working in a more collaborative environment. It was a hard decision to make because I love the mission of the company, but I ultimately think this is the right choice. So again, I don't think some employers are going to dig deep into it. But if you feel like you can't come up with the right language to use, you just have to be positive about it. So here's some language to kind of help you through that. Practice. And, what you're saying in your body language has to be congruent too. So maybe it is a bad experience, a bad situation. Make sure that your body language is congruent with what you're saying. If you're sweating a lot, or your facial expressions are, your blood's starting to boil, your face is turning red, is it really the reason why you're leaving? So be confident in what you're saying, basically. But it comes with practice. That's why practicing interview questions is so important. So explaining your gaps. Again, this is the year where people are kind of leaving jobs. They understand it. They just, are you leaving because, you're working in jobs that you're not motivated to do or not happy with? So if you're in an interview, it isn't an issue, right? You've got the interview. They see the gaps. So yay, you got the interview. This is where you could kind of dig a hole for yourself. So be careful, if you were laid off, say it, or furloughed, say it. It's okay. It's not you, it's just the situation. If you left to raise a family or a caregiver for an aging parent, that is something it happens a lot. I work with a lot of people that had to leave their jobs because they're caring for an aging parent and they don't want to put them in a nursing home. And that is okay. So on your resume, to fill that gap, if you haven't, treat it like an employment position. It's a caregiving position. Go to Indeed.com and look up caregiving positions and use that job description. Be confident, because if you struggle, it might seem you're hiding something. Share something good about the position. Again, the positivity, and share what you learned that you learned a new skill. So even though there's a gap and you may have been a caregiver or laid off, if you're laid off, you're still, you're at the library taking classes or doing tutorials to, strengthen your computer skills, or, strengthen your Microsoft skills. Or caring for an aging person, maybe you're having to work with Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security more, and that's overwhelming. I've had to do that myself, and you're trying to keep track of it on Excel now. You've never used Excel, so you're perfecting your Excel skills. Did you learn something new? So example, I stayed home to look after my sick mother. I knew I would be unable to devote myself properly to my job and to taking care and to being a caretaker. So I resigned. The situation has changed and I'm able to re-enter the workforce. I'm excited about making a positive contribution to the company. So again, positivity. What's your biggest weakness? Okay, so here's that question. Employers may ask about your weakness to see if you have a sense of self-awareness and how you're working to improve, or determine if your weakness is a skill, or they're determining if your weakness is a skill that's got to be a strength to succeed in the position. And this is where paying attention to the job description and what they're talking about in the interview, to determine, you know, okay, what are the strengths or what are these skills that they're looking for, so that you don't give an example of it being your weakness, you know? So, but don't talk yourself out of the interview by addressing a weakness that's got to be a strength to succeed in the position. So I found this video that I think might be helpful. So I'm going to share that with you. Give me a moment to pull it up. Okay, so can everybody see the screen? I have a video up.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna make it bigger and I'm going to play it.
I'm your host, Jordan Hudgens. I'm a Ruby dev and the CTO of the DevCamp platform. On Tuesdays, I cover various stages of preparing for a coding interview. And today, I'm going to talk about the best way to answer the question of what's your greatest weakness. To be 100% honest, I'm not a huge fan of this question, because to me it's a lose-lose type of scenario where if the applicant says a true weakness and is completely honest, they probably won't get the job. But if they lie and they just make something up that's not true, it's going to be evident very quickly. However, throughout the years, I have been asked this question before in interviews, so I thought it'd be a good one to prepare for. Since I've been on both sides of the interview chair, both being the applicant and also being someone who is hiring for a team, I wanted to put together a comprehensive list of the worst ways to answer it, why, and then the best ways to answer this question, and what that will tell the interviewer. Here are some bad answers to your greatest weakness. A bad answer is saying that you have a hard time saying no. This will say that you're weak and will take on too many projects, typically resulting in poor performance. The next way to answer this question poorly is to say that you have a hard time staying on a single task. This means you should probably either learn how to focus or that you should be an entrepreneur. Working for a company usually means long hours on repetitive tasks, and if someone is bouncing from project to project, they're not going to be a good asset to the team. Another poor approach answering this question is saying that you can be arrogant. I had a professor in grad school, Dr. Richard Gelfond, who's one of the most brilliant computer scientists I've ever known, who said this about arrogance. Being arrogant occasionally doesn't matter, but it's never good. An arrogant employee won't be able to work well with others and will have a hard time taking correction or learning anything new because they already know it all. Now let's go over some good strategies for answering the greatest weakness question. One answer would be to say that you can be slow to take action. This is an interesting answer because it could be a bad approach if you leave it at this, since it might tell the interviewer that you are timid, which would be a poor character trait. However, if you follow it up by saying that you are very detailed and that before you start a task, you want to have a clear strategy for how to move forward, that is an employee I want to have on my team. Another good approach would be to say that you can be overly critical on yourself. This will tell the interviewer that you care about your work and that doing it well is very important to you. Make sure to follow it up with how you're working on yourself and that you're still working on being a craftsman at your work, but to not get too down on yourself for irrelevant reasons. Another good answer could be to say that you have a tendency to be quiet. This is one of my favorite things to hear, assuming that the individual follows it up by saying that they can be quiet because he or she thinks that it's more important to listen to all of the details of a project or challenge before giving an answer. This tells me that the individual is going to be detail-oriented and won't miss key items because they were too busy thinking about what they were going to say next. I hope these strategies help you properly answer the "what's your greatest weakness" interview question, and good luck with the interview.
Okay, so did that confuse people? Did it answer some questions about weaknesses? I think with that question, don't use a standard response, right? The goal of the interview is to be better than the next candidate and unique. So when answering that question, give an example of how you turned a weakness maybe into a strength or what you learned from it. I was looking at other videos on how to explain to answer this question, and it's interesting because there was a theme between them, and it was asking questions and taking correction. The one about, too detailed. Well, okay. One of the examples she gave, this woman gave was, she talked about her weakness is that she just kind of takes off on projects, that she's enthusiastic about it and takes on projects. But then she forgets to ask questions. And it's okay to ask questions and kind of think about it before you just kind of go off on it, and not, put thought into it. Another video, they were talking about, taking correction. And I think that's one thing that the hiring manager is trying to figure out in the interview is, can we get along? And when you're doing something that is wrong, can I correct you? Which is maybe a question that you could ask in the interview too, is how do you redirect or correct your participants or the people that they're your direct reports, because they want to know, if I tell you you're doing something wrong, can you take the criticism and not be so defensive? But then again, we need a manager that if they're going to do that, it's timely and it's done appropriately with the right tone and they're not yelling at us, because if we're doing something wrong, we don't know we're doing it wrong and we need to be told, but there's a right way to be, critiqued. And so, you're trying to figure out, are they, going to be respectful towards me? And the other side of the other side of the table, the hiring manager is trying to figure out, can I, critique you or tell you you're doing something wrong without being offended? So it was interesting because that was kind of some of the things that they were getting down to with the weakness question. But ultimately, you don't want to talk yourself out of the weakness question or talk yourself out of the job. You don't want to give a response that is standard, and you don't want to give a response, that's going to talk you out of the job. That's why, again, it's so important to pay attention to what the questions that they're asking. Are they asking a lot of questions about being organized, without saying, how do you organize yourself, or how do you set priorities and time management and meeting goals? Well, obviously, if they're asking all these questions, you've got to be really organized in this position. You need to give examples of, things that you've done in your past where you had to be organized and how successful you were and how to, achieve goals. So paying attention to what they're saying in the interview is so important so that you don't respond in a way that's going to talk you out of the job, but you've got to be unique about it too. Any questions about the weakness question?
Yeah, and I had a couple of questions. I was the one who originally opposed the question because I was talking to you about technology. Like for me, I've been out of the workforce 8 years. And so for me, Microsoft Word, I'm fine with, but like Excel and PowerPoint. With Excel, I'm going to take a class in LinkedIn Learning because I saw that they had one, and I'm actually doing it through the library, ironically on that point. But I'm like mortified to even apply to some of these positions because office is considered just standard. Like everyone should know this. Like, well,
Right. Well, you know, they might say just generally office suites and might not even use Excel. Honestly, I don't know too many people that use Excel, and I don't know of too many people that are even proficient in it.
oh,
It's
okay.
hard. But don't let that stop you from applying.
Okay.
Because if you could still get an interview, you've got a chance. And that's where you say, I'm taking classes.
I am taking classes, ironically, exactly what you said with people.
Right, and that's what
reaching
you're
out.
gonna do, is you're gonna tell them that. So don't let that stop you
Okay.
from applying for the position. Because again, unless it's like, I don't know a lot of companies that are using Excel. I really don't. So just go for it. Go for the position. If you could do 60% of that job, apply for it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions about the weakness question? And again, you really need to practice how you're going to answer it, time yourself, record yourself. So these are, I'm going to move away now from answering questions and dissecting them. And we're going to move on to now talking about virtual interviews. A lot of employers are doing this. And so I just wanted to give you just a little bit of information about it. So a virtual interview is a two-way interaction, and it's conducted in real time, you know, using Zoom like we're using now. So, and they might, you know, do it on Zoom or Skype or GoToMeetings. These are called platforms. And so you meet here to talk. The other kind of online interviews are called these on-demand or asynchronous interviews. And this is a one-way. It's called a one-way interaction. A lot of employers are doing this, and I think we're going to see a lot more in the future doing this, where it's a software and the platform is HireVue, Job, Vite, Montage. And this is where they send you a link. They invite you to log into the software, and you're answering questions, but you're not talking to anybody. You're recording yourself answering a question, and then the employer is going to go into the software at their own leisure and listen to how you're answering these questions. And it's a one-way interview. And so you need to be aware that this is happening out there. It's interesting because yesterday I was part of a meeting. I'm part of the West Suburban Jobs Council group, and I think Leslie, I think the library might be part of it too, where in DuPage County, all of these agencies that work with people to find jobs, we meet and talk about, you know, how we can support each other and what's happening. And so we invited Indeed to come, and these were individuals that help work with the project teams. And the way that people are being recruited and interviewed for jobs is changing a lot. And it's in, you know, there's even this question out there about how useful resumes are in finding a good candidate. So things are changing, but it's definitely going in the direction of the on-demand or the one-way interactions, especially in the age of pandemics. And so you need to be aware of this and prepare for it. And it's just like a job interview. All of the etiquette and the way you prepare and how you handle yourself it all still applies to the two-way and the one-way interviews. It's answering the question using that STAR approach in about 2 minutes, and that comes with practice. So you need to test your technology. If you have an on-demand or a two-way interview, make sure that your computer or your smartphone or your laptop, it's working, the volume works. Make sure the lighting's okay. The lighting should be in front of you, never behind you. Make sure, I've been in Zoom before, and I've seen people with the window behind them, so the light is coming through, and it's like a silhouette of them. You can't make out their face, which is really important, because in those on-demand interviews, the on-demand interviews, especially the higher view, or really all of them, they are gauging your facial expressions to check and see if you're telling the truth. Are you sweating a little? Are you making eye contact or not? And it's the algorithm and these devices, these platforms are supposed to be a lot more smarter at picking that up than a person. So that's why the practice is so important. So choose your location, make sure that the light is not behind you, it's in front of you or right over you. You could have a piece of paper in front of you, a cheat sheet if you want, that's fine. Prepare your questions. So I'm sorry, something just came up that said that, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen just fine.
Okay, all right. Something just came up that said, now they can see your screen. I thought, well, I've been talking for 2 minutes. You should have been able to see my screen. But anyways, so everything applies if you're talking to somebody in real time, face to face, or an on-demand or a two-way. All of the etiquette applies. Be concise, to the point. Don't babble. Record yourself. Time yourself. There's people to help you. We're happy to do a mock interview or help you record it. If you get nervous, it's okay to pause for a couple of seconds. So let's test this. If you're talking and you pause, here's a 2-second pause. See, that's 2 seconds. Here is a 5-second pause. See, 5 seconds, that 3 seconds makes a difference. So, but it's okay to pause for a couple of seconds if you have to. Remember, it's not an interrogation, it is a conversation, except for the on-demand. I'm sorry, except for the one-way. It's really not, it is more of an interrogation, I guess. I don't know, because you can't ask questions, but you really are trying to figure out if this employer is good for you or not. What not to talk about, life situations. Don't share that you're having health issues. If you cannot do the job, if it says you have to lift 50 pounds and you can't, then don't apply. I think one thing you have to be aware of is that applications, if you notice at the end of an online application, it will ask you questions about disability, if you are a veteran, your ethnicity. Those are not questions the employer is asking you. Those are EEOC questions, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So it's my understanding that these applicant tracking systems are designed to kind of separate your application from the question when it gets to that point. And all of this information is tallied and documented so that every fall, it's around really this time of the year, then employers have to give reports to the EEOC about how many individuals that have applied are veterans or female or male or ethnicity or disability, because employers do get tax credits for hiring somebody with a disability or a veteran. So all of that information is being collected and the employer is not aware of, who's attached to whatever. And so I say all that to say, I think people don't realize that, and especially the question with disabilities, they think it's the employer asking it when the employer can't ask it. And so they're divulging information about their health. You are talking yourself out of a job. And yes, employers cannot discriminate, but you know what? People are human. And so you do not want to share, unless it's that question like the skill gap, when we talked about being a caregiver. Okay, you've proved that's behind you, you're moving on, but don't divulge any personal information. Don't talk about salary. Employers cannot ask you about salary that you've made in the past. In Illinois, it's illegal. They can't ask you how much you want, and they do it on applications, but they cannot ask you how much you've made in the past. Don't talk about it though, unless they bring it up, because you're having a discussion if you're a good fit. And some employers, they will let you know ahead of time, then fine, ask other questions about benefits, but really don't bring it up until they bring it up. Don't talk about how much you hate your last employer. Again, you got to be positive, don't be negative. And as I'm sitting here talking, I'm thinking about conversations that have happened on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of like recruiter influencers that are talking about how demeaning it is for employers to ask you, what's your weakness or why you want to work for us, or, not telling salary. I don't understand the resistance to it. Employers are just trying to figure out if you're a good fit. And yes, the interview process is imperfect, but it is what it is, and you've got to do what you can in that situation. And being confident is a big part of, being successful in the position, and being confident in your skills and your abilities. And so, I keep saying it, and people, kind of resist the, not practicing, but it's so important. Not everybody could talk off the top of their head. And if you're the kind of person that babbles, it really kind of keeps you on track in the interview. So I really encourage you to do that. So the bottom line is, don't be intimidated. Think of these questions, opportunities to share how you succeeded in your work. Sometimes the interview goes bad due to no fault of your own. So, recruiters, they don't know the position, and you might have a good conversation with the recruiter and feel like you've done well. Well, they're not the person that's going to hire you. They're just kind of vetting you to see if they think that you're a good fit and meet the requirements. And then it's the hiring manager that's going to decide if they actually want to interview you. And if you're interviewed by them, they're the ones that decide if they want to hire you. So, a good employer is going to ask the right questions. A good employer is going to train their hiring manager to be a good interviewer. And you need to really kind of pay attention to the whole hiring process. How are you being treated? And there's a lot of ghosting going on out there. And if you don't know what that means that, you've heard from a recruiter and they're said they're going to get back to you and they never do. Or, you fill out an application and you don't know where it is in the process. But quite frankly, the companies and the candidates are guilty of this. I actually just read I did a report and talked to job seekers and employers, and they're both accusing each other of ghosting. Like, employers will say, well, we reached out to them, we called their phone number, it's disconnected, or we can't leave a message. And then you have the candidate saying, I never heard from them. You know, it's really on both of us, the hiring manager, the recruiter, and the candidate. So, you know, you might not hear from them. There's nothing you could do. If you've got an email, yes, you want to follow up. We're going to talk about that. But if you don't hear from them, don't harass them. Send them one, maybe 2 emails or calls and leave it at that. But, you know, interviews go wrong. Hiring managers sometimes are biased. And I've been, you know, I had a situation where I had applied for a job. It was on a university campus. I was really excited about it. And I, you know, went to the interview. I had to park in a parking lot, you know, way far away from the office I had to go to. I had to walk there in the rain, in heels, finally get to the recruiter's office. And she's like, oh, we've got to go over here to talk to the hiring manager. And I think I might have rolled my eyes. I don't even know if she saw me or not. I had to walk all the way to the other side of the campus to talk to the hiring manager. And then finally, you know, I'm introduced to the manager and I could just tell she's, you know, looking me head to toe. We sit down and the first thing she said is, you know, do you have any questions? So I asked my questions and then she stared at me and I said, well, do you have any questions for me? She's like, nope. Like, what a waste of time, right? That was probably some of the worst interviews I've had, but it happens. You know, people are human. They are biased. People are biased against gender, ethnicity. It happens. It shouldn't. And companies are, I think some of our, you know, at least HR departments are trying to do their best to mitigate that and to train hiring managers on how to ask appropriate questions. You know, a lot of companies have standard interview questions that everybody has to ask, but biases happen. How you handle is up to you. I mean, that's all I'm going to say on the biases. And they're stupid interview questions. I've been in interviews where they've asked me, you know, in high school, what table did you sit at? And I think they were trying to figure out, are you the cheerleader? You know, are you the smart one? Are you the geek? Whatever, you know, or, you know, who's your favorite movie star? Just, you know, stupid questions. And again, you know, some people think the questions about, you know, why do you want to work here or weaknesses are stupid questions. You know, you have no control over the questions they're going to ask you unless they're illegal, like the questions of salary or, you know, questions, are you married? You know, are really inappropriate questions. But you know, you do the best that you can. And hiring managers aren't perfect. Sometimes they're stupid. But you need to know that sometimes it's not your fault. You've done everything you can. You've practiced, you know, you put the smile on your face. And as long as you've done the best, pat yourself on the back and move forward. If you have made some mistakes, then, you know, change how you answer that question or do more research or practice, learn from the mistake and go on, and keep, you know, looking till you find that job. But yes, there are bad interviewers out there. So ending an interview, restate your skills. You could ask the question, which you have to ask questions too. I'm not sure I put that on here. I'm sorry, I forgot that one about what questions to ask. You know, I think questions I like to ask is, you know, after talking to me, is there, you know, any concern about my skills being a good fit for this position? Because it's an opportunity for you to restate your skills if you kind of overlook that. You know, questions about, especially if you're talking to a hiring manager, you know, how do you manage your team? You know, talk about the value questions, like if they say that they value their employees, then ask them, how do you value your employees, or why do you work here? Or, what's the greatest reward of work or of your job? There's all kinds of good questions that you could ask, but restate your skills. Thank them for the meeting and follow up with them. Send them a thank you email and let them know, I look forward to hearing from you. What are the next steps? Those are, some of the questions, but always thanking them and following up with an email. You could send something through the mail if you want, and an email, however you want to handle that. Stay positive, make eye contact. I forgot to mention, if you are doing a online interview or the asynchronous the on demand, always look into the camera. The camera is the eye. So make eye contact, and you could turn your eye to the left or the right or whatever, but you need to make eye contact. Listen to what they're saying. Again, you need to pay attention to what they're saying about the skills of the job so you could sell yourself. Tell the truth. You need to know that the application is actually a legal document. And so if you're lying about your skills and it's found out, you can be fired. Even 6 months, a year into the job, you could be fired. So just tell the truth. Keep your answers short and to the point. Don't talk more than, 2 minutes, 2.5 if you have to, but get to a point if you're gonna, go more than 2 minutes, and ask questions.